"The best thing you could do for this family," my son said, leaning against the kitchen counter I had paid for in the house I had helped buy, "is stop pretending you're still needed here." He didn't shout it. That's the part that stayed with me. He said it the way you'd tell someone the grocery store is closed on Sundays. Matter of fact, final. Like he'd been rehearsing it for months and was relieved to finally get it out. His wife, Celeste, was standing just behind him. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. The small smile at the corner of her mouth said everything she needed to say. I was 64 years old. I had just sold the house I'd lived in for 31 years. I had moved 400 miles to be closer to my son, to help with my grandchildren, to not die alone in a house full of furniture that still smelled like my late wife. And now I was standing in the kitchen of a home I had co-signed the mortgage on, being told I was no longer needed. I remember thinking, I should have seen this coming. And then I remember thinking, I did see it coming. I just loved him too much to believe it. My name is Bernard. I'm 67 now, and this is the story of how I learned that the most expensive thing in the world isn't a house or a wedding or a college education. It's the moment you finally stop making excuses for someone who has never once made one for you. My wife Carol passed away 3 years before all of this, pancreatic cancer. 6 weeks from diagnosis to gone. We'd been married 38 years. We had one son together, Nathan. He was 31 when she died. He flew in from Portland for the service, stayed 5 days, and then flew back. I understood. He had a life. He had Celeste, who he'd married 2 years prior, and a daughter named Poppy, who was 18 months old at the time. I understood all of it. What I didn't understand at first was why the calls got shorter after Carol died, why the visits stopped, why, when I mentioned feeling lonely in the house, Nathan would change the subject to something neutral, the weather, the NFL draft, a show he'd been watching. He was never cruel about it. He was just absent. There's a kind of cruelty in absence that doesn't leave marks you can point to. About 8 months after Carol died, Celeste called me. This surprised me. Celeste had never been the one to initiate calls. She was pleasant enough in that careful way that people are pleasant when they want something. She asked how I was doing. I said I was managing. She said that was good. And then, after a pause that felt rehearsed, she said that they'd been thinking. They'd been looking at houses in the Portland area, something bigger, now that they were thinking about having another child. But Portland real estate was brutal. Even with Nathan's income from his project management job, the down payment was going to be a stretch. She didn't ask me directly. She talked around it. Mentioned that I'd mentioned wanting to be closer to Poppy. Mentioned that their neighborhood had good schools. Mentioned that it was a shame Carol and I had never gotten to spend more time together as a family. And somewhere in all of that circling around, the shape of what she was asking became clear. They needed money. I want to be honest about something. I wasn't naive. I'm a retired civil engineer. I spent 30 years designing water treatment infrastructure in central Ohio. I'm not a man who signs things without reading them, who lends money without thinking. But grief does something to you that logic doesn't have an answer for. It makes you reach toward warmth, any warmth, even warmth that might be manufactured. Carol had always been the one who kept our family close. Without her, I felt the distance from Nathan like a physical ache. And here was Celeste calling me, talking about family, talking about being together. I told myself this is a chance. I sold the house in Dayton for $340,000, a good price for the area, though it gutted me to do it, because Carol had picked out the tile in the master bath herself, and I used to sit in that bathroom sometimes just to look at it. I co-signed the mortgage on a 4-bedroom house in a suburb outside Portland called Beaverton. My name went on the deed. Nathan and Celeste put down $60,000. I contributed $95,000 toward the purchase and covered the first year of property taxes as a gift. I moved into the in-law suite on the ground floor. For the first 4 months, things were fine. Better than fine, actually. I washed Poppy in the mornings while Celeste went to her Pilates class. I made dinner twice a week. Real dinners, pot roast and chicken soup, and the lemon pound cake that Nathan had loved since he was a boy. I drove Poppy to her pediatric appointments when Nathan was traveling for work. I fixed the weather stripping on the back door and recaulked the upstairs bathroom and set up the new router when their internet went out on a Saturday night. I was useful, and being useful felt like being loved. I know the difference now. I didn't then. The shift came gradually, the way these things always do. First it was small, Celeste mentioning that I didn't need to make dinner on Thursdays because they were doing a meal kit now. Then it was medium, Nathan suggesting I might want to think about a schedule for when I use the main kitchen, because Celeste found it stressful not knowing when someone else would be in there. Then it was large, being asked not to drop by the living room in the evenings without texting first, because they use that time to decompress as a couple. I started spending more time in my suite. I bought a small countertop oven so I could make my own meals without being a disruption. I started texting before I came upstairs. I started feeling like a tenant who was late on rent, except I'd already paid. The second grandchild came, a boy they named Felix. I waited 3 days before I texted to ask if I could come up and see him because I didn't want to be intrusive. Celeste replied, "We'll let you know when we're ready for visitors." I was living 40 feet away. I had a key to their front door that I never used anymore because I'd been asked not to. I started asking myself questions I didn't want to ask. What am I doing here? What did I give up? What did I give up? I don't know exactly when Celeste decided I needed to go. I think she decided before I arrived, honestly. I think the version of this plan that existed in her mind had me as a source of capital and free childcare with an expiration date she'd already chosen. What I do know is that by the time Nathan had that conversation with me in the kitchen, he had been coached. The phrasing was too clean, the points too organized. He talked about my energy in the house and how it created tension. He talked about Celeste needing the space to feel like the home was fully hers. He talked about how it might be healthier for everyone if I found my own place nearby. I asked him how long he'd been feeling this way. He looked at the ceiling for a moment and said, "A while." I asked him about the mortgage, about the deed. He said they'd been talking to a real estate attorney, and there were options for restructuring the ownership arrangement. He said it in a tone that made it sound simple and reasonable, the way someone sounds when they've been told exactly what to say. That was a Tuesday evening in March. I went back to my suite and I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time. I have a photograph of Carol on the nightstand, the one from our trip to Glacier National Park 1998. She's laughing at something I said, and her hair is blowing sideways, and she looks so completely alive. I looked at that photograph for a while. Then I called my friend Wallace. Wallace and I went to Ohio State together. He became a contractor. I became an engineer. He has been my closest friend for 41 years. I told him what had happened. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Bernie, what exactly is on the deed?" I told him. He said, "Don't do anything. Don't sign anything. Don't move anywhere. Call an attorney tomorrow morning, first thing." I said I didn't want to make this into a legal situation. Wallace said, "It already is one. They just didn't tell you that part." I called an attorney the next morning. Her name was Susan Adler, a real estate and estate planning attorney in Portland with 30 years of experience. I found her through the Oregon State Bar Referral Service. I explained the situation. She asked me to bring every document I had, the deed, the mortgage paperwork, my bank transfer records, everything. I sat in her office 2 days later and watched her read through the file. After about 10 minutes, she set it down and looked at me over her reading glasses. She said, "Mr. Bernard, you are listed as a co-owner with right of survivorship on this property. Your name is on the mortgage. You cannot be removed from either without your consent and a formal legal process. They cannot force you out. They cannot restructure anything without your signature." I said, "They seem to think they can." She said, "They're mistaken." I want to tell you what that felt like. It wasn't triumphant. It wasn't angry. It was something quieter and sadder. The feeling of a door that you thought was locked turning out to still be open. I hadn't lost everything, but I'd gotten close enough to the edge to understand what losing everything would feel like, and that understanding doesn't leave you. Susan also pointed out something I hadn't considered. The $95,000 I had contributed toward the purchase and the property tax payments I had made were documented. If I chose to pursue it, there was a case to be made for formal recognition of my financial contribution beyond my financial contribution beyond my ownership stake. She wasn't recommending I go that route immediately, but she wanted me to know the full picture. I asked her what my options were. She laid them out calmly. I could assert my rights as a co-owner and continue living in the property. I could negotiate a buyout. They'd have to pay me fair market value for my share of the equity, which at current Beaverton prices was considerably more than I'd put in. Or I could do nothing for now, document everything, and wait. I chose to wait, but I also chose to do something else. I went home, back to the suite, and I spent the next 2 weeks being very quiet and very observant. I said good morning. I admired Felix through the glass door of the nursery when Celeste happened to be walking by. I brought Poppy a book about a dog named Ernest that I'd found at Powell's, and she sat in my lap for 45 minutes while I read it to her. Celeste watched that from the hallway with an expression I couldn't fully read. I also quietly contacted the mortgage servicer and confirmed that my name remained on the loan and that any modification would require my written consent. I confirmed the same with the title company. I was not disruptive. I was not confrontational. I simply made sure that every door that was mine to lock was locked. Then Nathan came to me. It was a Sunday afternoon. He knocked on the door of my suite, which he hadn't done in months. He came in and sat in the chair across from my reading chair, and he looked like he hadn't been sleeping well, which he probably hadn't. He told me that he and Celeste had spoken with their attorney. He told me they understood the situation with the deed. He told me they'd like to find a resolution that works for everyone. I asked him what resolution he had in mind. He said they were willing to buy me out. They have the house appraised and pay me my proportional share of the equity. I looked at my son for a long moment. He was 34 years old. He had his mother's eyes and his father's stubbornness, and somewhere in there was the boy who used to fall asleep on the couch watching baseball with me, who called me from his college dorm at midnight when he was failing organic chemistry, who stood at his mother's graveside and held my hand without being asked. I could still see that boy. I just couldn't reach him anymore. I told Nathan I would consider the buyout, but I had conditions. He asked what they were. First, the appraisal would be conducted by an independent appraiser, not one they selected. Second, the buyout amount would reflect not only my ownership share, but my documented financial contributions. Third, I would have 90 days to find alternative housing before vacating, not 30, not 60. And fourth, this one I needed him to hear clearly. Poppy, I wanted a written, informal agreement that I would have regular access to my granddaughter. Not a legal document, not a custody arrangement, just a commitment in writing from my son that he would not allow his daughter to lose her grandfather. Nathan was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "The fourth one isn't up to me." I said, "Then you need to make it up to you." He left without answering. I didn't know which way it would go. I sat with that uncertainty for several days, and I won't pretend it was easy. There's a specific grief in realizing that you cannot negotiate your way into being loved. You can protect your assets, you can assert your rights, you can document every transfer and counter every legal maneuver, but you cannot make someone want you at their table. What happened next came in pieces. The appraisal came in at $518,000. My share of the equity, accounting for the down payment contribution and the property taxes, was calculated after some back and forth between attorneys at $187,000. It was more than I'd put in. The Portland market had been kind to that house. I found a one-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood called Lake Oswego, 12 minutes from Nathan's house. It had a small balcony that faced west and a gas fireplace and good light in the mornings. The building had an elevator, which I didn't need yet but appreciated having. I paid first and last and set up the furniture, some of it new, some of it pieces I'd brought from Dayton that had spent 2 years in storage. The night before I moved out of the suite, I took the photograph of Carol off the nightstand and wrapped it in the flannel shirt I'd worn the day I'd moved in. I walked through the suite one last time and I turned off every light. Nathan came to help me move boxes. Celeste did not. We worked mostly in silence, which was its own kind of conversation. At one point, he dropped a box of books and we both knelt to pick them up. And for a moment we were just two people on a floor picking up books, and it felt almost normal, and then it didn't anymore. Before I got in my car, he handed me an envelope. Inside was a single handwritten page. It said that he intended for Poppy to know her grandfather. It said Sundays, twice a month, and holidays to be discussed. It said he was sorry for how things had gone. It wasn't eloquent. It was 3 short paragraphs in his cramped handwriting, the same handwriting he'd had since 8th grade. I folded it and put it in my shirt pocket, and I thanked him. I didn't say anything else. There wasn't anything else to say that would have helped either of us. I drove to my apartment. I made a pot of coffee. I sat on the balcony in the late afternoon light, and I looked out at the lake, and I thought about Carol, the way I do every day, and I thought about what she would say if she could see all of this. She would say, "You stayed too long." She would say it kindly because she did everything kindly. She would say, "You stayed because you love him and that's not wrong. But staying longer wouldn't have changed anything. And now you know that, and now you can rest." I've been in this apartment for 14 months. I see Poppy on Sundays mostly. She is 4 years old now, and she calls me Pop Pop, and she likes the Ernest books, and she likes when I make her scrambled eggs with cheese, and she asks me sometimes why I don't live in the big house anymore, and I tell her that Pop Pop has his own house now, and it's very nice, and she can come visit anytime. I have not been inside Nathan's house since I moved out. I have not spoken to Celeste beyond brief, polite exchanges when she drops Poppy off. Nathan and I have dinner sometimes, the two of us, at a diner near my apartment that has good pie. We talk about baseball and about his work, and sometimes we talk about his mother. We don't talk about what happened. I don't know if we ever will. Some things get buried not because they're resolved, but because you both need to keep living. I'm not going to tell you I'm fine with all of it. I'm not. I'm fine in the way that you're fine after something breaks and you set the pieces down and you walk forward anyway. I miss the version of my son I used to know before whatever happened between him and Celeste, before the careful phrasing and the rehearsed conversations and the feeling of being managed. I don't know who changed him or whether he changed himself. Maybe neither is fair. Maybe people just become who they're going to be, and there's no one to blame for that. What I know is this: I own my apartment. My name is the only one on the lease. I eat when I want and sleep when I want, and nobody knocks on my door to tell me the kitchen schedule. I have $187,000 in a money market account earning interest. I have a granddaughter who will grow up knowing her grandfather's voice and his scrambled eggs and the books he reads to her. I have Wallace, who still answers the phone on the second ring. And I have Carol's photograph on my nightstand, right where it belongs, in a house that is mine. I learned that you cannot buy your way into a family that has already decided you don't belong, but you can protect yourself from being taken apart by one. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, that protection is the thing that leaves the door open. just barely, for something real to grow back. Not everything, but something. Sometimes something is enough. I keep coming back to that Tuesday evening in March. The kitchen. Nathan's voice, calm, rehearsed, like someone reading from a script they'd memorized in another room. And me, standing there, nodding slowly, feeling the floor shift under 30 years of sacrifice. What happened to me didn't happen overnight. That's what I want people to understand. It happened in the way a river cuts through stone. Not with one violent rush, but slowly, patiently, one small current at a time. First the dinner schedule, then the kitchen hours, then the text before you come upstairs rule. Each thing on its own seemed reasonable. Together they were a map drawn by someone who had already decided where I would end up. I used to think that giving was its own protection, that if you loved someone enough, gave enough, showed up enough, the love would hold. I sold my house. I put my name on a mortgage. I recalked their bathroom and set up their router and read to their daughter on Sunday afternoons. And none of it, not one piece of it, created the safety I thought it would. Because what I was really doing was confusing generosity with security. They are not the same thing. Generosity is something you give. Security is something you build, quietly, with your own name on the paperwork. What protected me in the end wasn't the money, though the money mattered. It was something I'd carried my whole life without knowing how valuable it was. The habit of reading before signing, of understanding what I'd agreed to, of not letting grief or loneliness talk me out of my own good judgment. I had spent 30 years as an engineer because I believed in systems, in structures, in things that held weight. When I finally applied that same discipline to my own life, the ground came back under my feet. And then there was the question of what to do with the anger, because there was anger. There still is, sometimes on certain evenings when the apartment is quiet, and I think about Poppy growing up in a house where her grandfather was once asked to text before coming upstairs. Anger is honest. I don't think you should talk yourself out of honest things. But I also know that the men who let anger do the driving tend to end up somewhere they didn't mean to go. I let Susan Adler carry the legal weight. I let Wallace carry the emotional weight on the nights I needed to talk. I carried the rest myself, quietly, one day at a time. That's not weakness. That's the choice to keep going when stopping would be easier. What I hope, if you're listening to this and you recognize something of yourself in my story, is that you hear this part. Your name on a document is not the same as your worth as a person. But your worth as a person absolutely determines whether you fight to keep your name on the document. Bernard didn't fold. Bernard made a phone call, not a dramatic one, not a vengeful one. Just a clear-eyed, measured call to a woman with 30 years of experience and reading glasses who looked at my paperwork and told me the truth. The truth was enough. I still have Carol's photograph on my nightstand. I still have Sunday mornings with Poppy. I still have Wallace, who answers on the second ring. I lost what I thought was a family. I kept what actually was one. That's the whole story, really, and maybe it's yours too.